Good afternoon, and I am so pleased to be back in Lawrence and able to attend lunch here at the ECM, because it's certainly one of the ways I've kept up with things that are going on, and I appreciate all of you coming, although I know that the reporting in the paper has been pretty good about what's been happening, and Representative Davis and his staff have done very well about getting out alerts and newsletters. I managed to so far get out one newsletter this session, and I think it's because every day when I get to my office in Topeka and start to read emails, there's one more thing that needs to be addressed that day. So more than in other sessions, there have been a great number of issues to address. I think some of that's because we had a lot of new legislators, particularly in the House, and they introduced a lot of bills, and lots of them had questions. So when I was trying to think about the session, start out with, I think, the governor and his legislative agenda. And then one of the things that I was reminded about is so often history is what we know and what we've experienced. And I think the governor was particularly kind of stuck in that rut when he talked about the budget. And he made claims about how he was able to turn around the budget situation in this state. Certainly he came in when we didn't have a lot of money in our state coffers, but he also came in when the legislature had taken an important and I think difficult step to say that we would raise sales tax for 3 years. And so he's claiming that he was able to turn this around with no tax increases, but just no tax increases on his watch. He took advantage of that, and he'd still like to take advantage of that. So one of the big, I think, disagreements that's been going on between the Senate and the House and the individual legislators is whether that sales tax should be continued. The governor is also claiming that we haven't cut funding for schools. And if you look at the overall dollar amount, that could be true, but we've seen some shifts and some payments for bond debt, for capital improvements for schools, and particularly for the CAPERS, the Kansas Public Employee Retirement payments made by the state on behalf of school teachers, and they're counting that as money for the schools. Not quite the same thing as money that's available to hire teachers or to keep the lights on in the classrooms. I think the one that's really gotten to me is his claim about the water legislation, and I think he's very fond of saying he really worked so that we no longer have use it or lose it. But in fact, a former representative, Josh Slotty, who was the secretary for the Department of Agriculture, worked on legislation that changed that, I think 2 years before, and the governor and legislative staff agreed, simply clarified some bits about how that was working. So anyway, history sort of is what we know, and I can only go back to 2005 in the legislature, but do want to say how appreciative I am of the legislators we have had from this district. So every year there are things that you can look back on and you say, here's what worked and here's what we can be proud of, and then other things that you say, oh my gosh, this happened and it's made a big change, and unfortunately a change that may not good for the future of Kansas. So I thought I would start out with the good news, because I know that we can get through that. And I'm not sure that there's time to go through all the bad news. So some of the things that I think we can look back at are, unfortunately, I wrote them down as good news, and then I realized it was really holding the line as opposed to moving forward. So there was a discussion about renewable energy that started in an interim last summer and continued in the Utilities Committees this session, where Americans for Prosperity were arguing that the requirement for a renewable portfolio actually increases utility bills for all of us. So they wanted to roll back the state requirement for renewable energy. Well, the good news is the facts weren't on their side, that in fact the part of increase for renewables is maybe as much as 1.7%, but the increases that particularly were seen in the Kansas City area of 16 or 17% in utility costs are much more attributable to Iatan, the new coal plant that was constructed, and the requirements for increased equipment to manage the emissions from coal plants. So, in fact, we're looking at a much significantly larger share of those increases related to coal. We had a lot of discussion this year about corporate farming, and some of it related to really CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations. So the discussion in the legislature was wide-ranging. It talked about reducing our nuisance laws. It talked about saying that we are not going to any longer allow our counties to vote as to whether they would like to see corporate farming in their communities. And so we held the line. There is some interest in allowing counties to have a vote on whether they'd like to attract this. And I think a very good suggestion. Right now, if you want to start CAFO and you're a corporation and not a Kansas farm corporation or a family farm corporation, you have to get permission from a county. The change that was proposed in the Senate was that the county could decide if they wanted to attract that kind of industry and then put it on a list that the Department of Agriculture could say these counties are quote-unquote open for business. So that would save those businesses time. They could know where they could locate without waiting for a vote. Got hung up in committee. I thought the other interesting thing is the corporate farming law was put forward by saying we have some unconstitutionality with our current statutes. And they were looking particularly at this definition of Kansas Farm Corporation because you're discriminating against a corporation based on where people are. So I proposed an amendment just to strike Kansas Farm Corporations from our statutes. And then all of a sudden it wasn't important at all. We could wait till next year. So there we go. We did address issues of human trafficking, and I think make some good changes so that we're no longer talking about prostitution and going after women, but in fact talking about sexual exploitation and selling sexual services. So that was a good change. We put together, and this was one of the bills that was passed, actually the bill that finally made it through the conference committee, came out of the House, but I did have my name on the bill that opened up the statute of limitations on rape, so it's no longer just 5 years after someone who's younger than 18 can seek court action. We did, based on the constitutional amendment that was passed last year about allowing for different rates on watercraft, property tax rates, work on a bill to reduce those from 30% assessment to 11.5% next year and 5% years after that. Good news for anybody that has any boats. Bad news for counties who, like Douglas and Jefferson, have large lakes and count on that property tax assessment. So we talked some about the courts, and this was not done certainly in the Senate. The Senate passed bills allowing for constitutional amendments, both on selection of Supreme Court justices, but also on changing school finance litigation, or what they thought might change that. We have the House to thank for holding the line on constitutional amendments. Unfortunately, the selection of judges for the Court of Appeals is not in the Constitution, it's in statute. So that bill went through, and I believe was the first one that the governor signed. So, Representative Davis, can you think of any other good news we have? And if not, I'm going to turn around and ask Paul to start in on, I think, some tax and budget questions, and then I'll come back and fill in more bad news.
Actually going to pull this microphone away here. I've lost my voice yesterday, and fortunately it's back today, but I'll try to talk into this microphone as much as I can, so I don't have to speak too loudly. But Marci did a really good job of, I think, highlighting the very few highlights that we have at the legislature. She's living in a very different world than she was living in a year ago, because the state senate was really the center of sanity at the Kansas Capitol for the past couple of years, and things have changed very dramatically. There was a coalition of Democrats and moderate Republicans that were able to stop a lot of bad things from happening over the past 2 years. And as most of you who've been following what's going on in Kansas politics know, that Sam Brownback decided to essentially declare war on part of his own political party and oust all of these moderate Republicans from office, and they were very successful in doing that in the primary, and they have all been replaced by folks that are very loyal to the governor, very loyal to the Kansas Chamber of Commerce and the Koch brothers, and follow that agenda. And so it's a very different place than it has been. Believe it or not, the House of Representatives is now seen as the more moderating body, and that is a little hard to believe when you look around and see who's in the House of Representatives, but that is the case. I wanted to maybe just take a little bit of a historical perspective about where we're at now, where we came from, and where we are now. When I came into the legislature in 2003, we had just been through sort of the post 9/11 economic downturn, and as you remember, the aircraft industry was hit very hard, and a lot of other industries in the state of Kansas and all over the country saw a pretty big downturn, and we saw a strong dip in revenues as a result of that. and the state really had to tighten its belt for a couple of years. And I think Governor Sebelius did a very remarkable job of trying to balance our budget and still try to fund the things that we think are very important in state government. And after a few years, we came out of that economic downturn, and we had a couple of very good years. In 2005, we had a special session as a result of the Supreme Court's ruling in the school finance case, and we put some significant dollars into K-12 education, and we've seen a lot of benefits as a result of that. Test scores are up, and unfortunately we're now seeing test scores go down a little bit because of the funds that have been cut from education, but I'll get to that a little bit later. But then we get around to 2008, and we see the recession begin, the worst economic recession that we've seen since the Great Depression. State revenues just plummeted, and the legislature, working with mostly Governor Parkinson at that time, had to cut $1 billion out of the state general fund spending. We have a state general fund of, at that time, was a little over $6 billion. So that gives you a little bit of context for how steep those cuts were. And those weren't cuts that anybody necessarily wanted to make. They were cuts that had to be made out of absolute necessity because our state revenues had dropped so significantly. But once again, we get through that, and the economy starts turning around, and revenues begin to rise again, and we have some opportunities to restore some cuts and do some good things. But now we're back into this situation yet again, where we have a very, very large budget deficit. But this situation is very different than it was before, because this is a self-inflicted budget deficit. It wasn't a result of a national economic trend. It was done by one act, and one act that was embodied in House Bill 2117. A lot of people don't remember bill numbers necessarily in the legislature, but about everybody in the House and the Senate knows exactly what House Bill 2117 was. And 2117, in my opinion, is just the most reckless act that the legislature has put into law the time that I have been there. It is the governor's tax plan that has now resulted in huge, huge budget deficits that will continue for years to come. And I want to talk about this on two fronts. With the governor, last year we had an opportunity, because revenues have been rising, to cut some taxes. And I think it was the right thing to do, to cut some taxes. I just happened, and I think Marci just happened to have a very different perspective about what taxes we ought to be cutting. We started the session out by proposing a reduction in property taxes. The property tax is the most despised tax by all Kansans. It is the tax that has gone up the most. And according to the Tax Foundation, which is a little bit right of center group that studies tax environments in all different states, we are in the bottom 10 states in terms of our property tax environment. If we have a tax problem in Kansas, it is a property tax problem, and it is not an income tax problem. But Governor Brownback wanted to go in a very different direction. He wanted to cut income taxes, and cut income taxes significantly. And this is just the first step on what he calls his glide path to zero, to eliminate the income tax altogether. And that is the long-term plan that Sam Brownback has for our state. The results of this, and if we were to cut the income tax to zero, we would eliminate half of the revenue for state government. 1/2 of the revenue. It is huge. And he thinks for some reason that we are going to be able to grow enough jobs that we will be able to replace all of that revenue because of the huge economic explosion that we're going to have. And he has called this his great experiment. Well, we're already seeing that this experiment is going to be a great failure. And this year, the legislature is dealing with a budget deficit in the next fiscal year, the fiscal year following that, and we know that it will continue on down the line. The governor has proposed that we raise the sales tax in order to help fill in this hole. I think one of the objections that I have, and I'm sure Senator Francisco has, is the fact that we are raising the most regressive tax that hits the people who are on the lowest end of the income scale the hardest, in order to pay for income tax cuts that are benefiting mostly the wealthiest of candidates. And let me talk just a second for what is really contained in this income tax plan. If you make over $250,000 a year, the average tax cut that you will receive on a yearly basis is almost $10,000 as a result of this. If you make $25,000 or less, the average tax cut that you will receive is $46. Now, what that actually doesn't factor in is a number of tax benefits that were targeted at helping people who are in poverty that have now been taken away. And then if you hike the sales tax on those folks, and the people at the bottom end of the income scale are really going to see a net tax increase as a result of this. And this is why this tax plan has been called Robin Hood in reverse. We're going to take from the poor to benefit the rich. The other part of this tax plan that is quite alarming is the part that eliminates taxes for all business entities except for C corporations. All business entities now will not have to pay taxes at all on their profits. How does this work? Well, if you have a small business and you are one of the owners in that business, your income flows through. Your business actually doesn't pay any tax, but you as an owner of the business pay taxes on what you receive from the business. And what it allows people to do is reclassify income from wages to profits. And if it's a profit, you don't have to pay taxes on it at all. I like to call this it's the workers pay, bosses don't tax law. Because you take a doctor's office, for an example, the doctor is able to take some income, classify it as profit. He won't pay any income tax on that whatsoever. But the nurse, the file clerk, the receptionist, they will all pay income tax on every dime of income that they receive. I mean, you want to talk about an issue of fairness. This tax law is just blatantly unfair. But the result of this has been that we have huge deficits that are coming in this next fiscal year, the fiscal year following that, and then on down the line. And the governor has proposed that we actually double down on his theory that this is going to provide great economic benefits, and he wants to take step 2 in driving this income tax down to zero. If you look but he doesn't want to do it for a couple of years because he doesn't think we can afford it right now, and he's actually right about that, but we can't afford it right now, and we can't afford it then. The hit on the state general fund in these out years is over $1 billion. And once again, this is our state general fund of $6 billion. We're going to take $1 billion out of that. So it sets us in a situation where we will have a permanent budget crisis, and you're already seeing manifestations of that. Right now on the table there is a 4% plus cut to higher education that will cost the University of Kansas almost $10 million alone. And when I say 4% plus, it's because there's 4%, and then there is a that is just devastating for an institution of higher education. And I could go on down the line talking about all the other things that are going to be affected by this. But this tax law is dominating everything that goes on in Topeka. And every cut they make, every time they raid the transportation fund for money, we take over the Turnpike Authority, look under that rock and this rock for money. All of it is going to pay for these income tax cuts that benefit the wealthiest of Kansas. This is an experiment that is not going to work. And I hope that people will learn about it, get educated about it, talk to their friends and neighbors about it, because this is the worst thing I think that has happened in the legislature for a long, long time, and the consequences of it will last not for years, but perhaps decades if we don't do something about it soon. So I've given you more bad news than anyone wanted to hear, but I'm going to ask Marci to come back up and maybe make a few more comments, and then we'll take some questions.
Well, Representative Davis, I appreciated your focusing some of the conversation on the University of Kansas, and certainly on that tax or budget reduction. But in addition to that, I think the Senate sent over Senate Bill 199, and we said, oh, let's pick some areas where we're going to ask KU to increase their funding. And this was on setting up a center for stem cell research, adult stem cell research. And we did that without any funding, said the university will just have to take care of it, and put legislators on the board to oversee that. So this is a concern that we are putting, I think, politics into research here at the university at a time when we're saying you're going to have to cut back on other research expenditures because we're not coming up with the funds. I think another bill that is probably going to affect the university is, was it 2052? Is that the gun legislation? And so we're saying we don't want to have soft targets for individuals with guns. So let's make sure everyone can defend themselves, and let's not make exceptions for K through 12 schools or our colleges and universities regarding concealed carry, unless they can demonstrate that they have a security plan, that every building and every entrance to every building is secured with equipment to make sure people aren't bringing in guns. So another unfunded mandate, if the university would like to choose to not have concealed carry in buildings on campus. But there is a option for the first 4 years of this legislation that you can submit a security plan. But after that, nothing goes. And I think one of the most interesting comments we heard on the Senate floor during the discussion was, I've been a teacher. I don't have a safe place to keep my purse. How would I find a safe place to keep a gun?
I might just add, one of the most interesting parts about one of these gun bills is a provision that it got watered down a little bit, but the original provision would allow our law enforcement officers to arrest federal law enforcement officers who are trying to enforce federal gun laws in Kansas. I mean, talk about silliness. It ended up getting watered down a little bit, but it just doesn't make a lick of sense. So, but what we would love to entertain, questions and comments. And Dennis?
This is really a gloomy report.
There's more. Gloomy report for a gloomy day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying about that the program that Brownback has instituted is going to fail. Do you have a sense of how long it will take before it becomes really clear that the proposals he's made are failing? I understand the down the line impact, but will there be a time like 7 years, 8 years, when it will be so clear that what's been done is a failure that everybody with a sane mind will see it? I'm asking, I know that's a crazy thing to ask you to make that prediction, but I'd be interested in your opinion.
Well, I think you're starting to see some of it now, and I think you will see more of it in the next year. If the legislature does not move forward on his sales tax proposal, the cuts will grow bigger. And the argument is made by many that maybe that's not a bad thing because people will be able to see the effects of it. And they'll probably start seeing that next year. Now, I think if you go on down the line a couple of years, then you're really going to see it. And a lot of it depends upon what future acts the legislature will take. But I think what is really important is that the legislature not go any farther on the income tax reductions, because if they do, we know that the hole is just going to grow that much bigger.
Do you think the conservative Republicans see that?
I think some of them do. I mean, what's interesting is this tax plan last year was the chair of the Senate Tax Committee, Les Donovan, who is a very conservative Republican, but is grounded in reality from time to time, referred to this in the Senate Republican caucus as the worst tax bill he'd ever seen. And a lot of people know that it is flawed, it was a mistake, it's way too big, we could never afford it. But then I think there's a camp of them that seem to believe that it's really going to work. And I think the governor's budget director and oftentimes the governor fall into that camp.
One of the difficulties about responding to tax changes is that they never happen immediately. And so, although many of us were concerned that we eliminated food sales tax rebates, that we eliminated the homestead refund for renters, people are looking at their tax forms and going, oh no, I still get the food sales tax rebate. I'm still going to get my homestead rebate, and I'm a renter. But that's because we're now working on our 2012 taxes, and you won't see that. So this also makes it difficult to argue about what we're seeing in terms of changes, because they haven't happened yet. And some people might not catch up to the fact in their withholding on income until they file their taxes next April, that in fact the state owes them money in a refund, and some of that money we've seen come in will have to be refunded.
Are there any other states that are doing anything mad like this?
Well, question is are there any other states that are doing anything mad like this? If you've been reading the Kansas City Star, Missouri is starting down this path, and a lot of people in Missouri are holding up Kansas as an example, and then there are a lot of people in Missouri who are saying, okay, yes, let's do hold up Kansas as an example. Look at the budget deficits they're running as a result of this. But your question is timely because another state that was going in this direction is Louisiana, and Governor Jindal just pulled his tax plan off the table and declared that there's just not enough support for it, and it's not going to go anywhere. So you know, you're seeing a lot of these governors that have been championing these kinds of proposals. I mean, none of which are, frankly, as robust and as radical as this one, but they're starting to get a lot of hot water for it.
Well, the only good thing that I can see in this is that we may say that we can consider it Kansas's gift to the nation, that he will never get elected president.
Geraldine?
Repeat it. I understand that the House voted 120 to nothing to reject the Senate tax plan, and good for you. However, if the sales tax does go back down to the level it's supposed to on July 1st, that will have an immediate impact, right? As of July 1st, the sales tax will be lower. So, what is your estimate of how deep a cut to social programs or other programs in Kansas this immediate drop in income will cause? And I'm assuming right away.
I am on Ways and Means. The delay in coming up with a budget has because we have not come up with a tax plan. So probably the differences that you're seeing right now between the Senate budget and the House budget are based on that reduction in sales tax, because the Senate assumed that there would be legislation to take that back. One thing that the governor did when he said in his State of the State speech was that I'm presenting you a budget that has a 7.5% ending balance, and you can count on this. But in fact, he was making the assumption that that sales tax would continue. That is not what's been done before, and in fact, it was not what was done when Governor Parkinson presented his State of the State and his budget. He presented two budgets, one based on what is current law, and the other based on what could happen if the legislature agreed to a sales tax increase for the 3 years. And so, although the governor is taking the stand that he is holding schools harmless, he's holding the university harmless, that was based on a sales tax increase. So he did not hold the universities harmless, and we should continue to ask for a budget from him that meets the law.
Bill?
You mentioned Governor Jindal. He probably saw the error of his ways more politically than fiscally. I mean, he didn't change it because he didn't believe it. Do you think there's any chance that Brownback will change his mind?
No.
No.
And also, you know, every day on Facebook or email, I get things telling me how terrible Brownback is, but I haven't seen much in the way that what the Democrats are going to do to overcome that.
You know what's? I talked to somebody in Washington D.C. recently, and they asked the question. He said, "Okay, well, I've seen these polls. Brownback is very unpopular, and is he at least backing down from some of his radical ideas?" And we said, "No, he's not." And it's interesting. You know, in my mind, I think that you know, he has a plan for the future. That plan is mainly targeted to voters that live outside the state of Kansas, and you know, and that is the path that he's heading down. You know, you know, it's no secret that the Democratic Party has had some rough times over the past few years. I mean, anytime you lose 16 seats in the legislature, you have you lose all your statewide elected officials, you lose your congressional seats. It's tough to recover from that. But you know, in many ways, Sam Brownback has become our best friend in terms of helping to grow the Democratic Party, and I think he's going to continue to be pretty good for that. So it's you know, things are. I think things are on the up and up. I was in Pittsburgh, and about 70 Democrats showed up for a monthly meeting in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and you know, and they're mad as heck. You know, it isn't just here in Lawrence; it is all over the state, and I think that people are going to continue to be energized by this. And so, yes, sir.
Well, just to respond to what you just said, I grew up in Sherman County, and there's no Democratic opposition out there. I can tell you that. There might be a few people, but people in Sherman County on the far west are basically right in line with the Brownback program, which, you know, breaks my heart because these are the people I grew up with, and we can't talk politics because we're so different. But I don't think we can rely on the pain that Brownback is inflicting to create jobs. I think we have to organize the political opposition, and I think we have to really include moderate Republicans, because this is a Republican state, dyed in navy blue, basically Republican, and so the political opposition has to be more than the Democratic Party, I think. And I'm really curious about, can you offer us any strategy or a set of strategies that helps us do that? Because I do think there is a lot of opposition, but it's disorganized and we don't have a focus for it. I think it's very important to get people organized and moving in a direction that can actually oppose this, including challenging what the assumption or the assertions that Brownback is making that just aren't true.
There's a group out there called the Kansas Traditional Republicans, and they're probably what I'd say maybe 50 or more former elected officials. I mean, it contains former Senate presidents, former speakers of the House, former chairs, state chairs of the Republican Party, and they have been very active and vocal in opposing the governor's proposals. And I think that when we get to the next election, you are going to see Republicans, moderate Republicans, in record numbers publicly opposing Sam Brownback. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we don't get anywhere as Democrats unless we have a coalition of independent voters and moderate Republicans.
I was personally impressed that the House apparently has put a brake on the implementation of more tax reductions, depending on whether the revenue's coming in. Is that going to go anywhere? You know what I speak of? They have a percent, you cannot, unless there's 2% increase in the revenues,
I know what
you can't be reducing more taxes.
Yeah, the House and the Senate have different approaches on taxes, and the Senate has largely gone with Governor Brownback's plan, which, as I said, in the out years, you look at fiscal year 2018 has a hit of over $1 billion to the state general fund. The House's approach is to only reduce income taxes as revenues exceed projections, and it's definitely better than the Senate approach. But I'd still argue it doesn't leave any room to put more dollars into schools, which we're going to have to do, I think, as a result of the school finance ruling, to put additional dollars into public safety. I mean, we're going to have to build a new prison here very soon, and put additional dollars into property tax relief, which I think is an issue that is bubbling up, and it's something we're going to have to do something about.
I was just going to comment that I do appreciate that they're trying to put some brakes on that, but it's somewhat of an illogical argument if you say we're going to see our revenue increase because of growth, and you have more children attending school, you have more highway traffic, you have, in essence, more expenditures, and they are simply looking at the income side of that rather than tying it to any need for increase in expenditures. And the assumption, if we're talking about this kind of growth in revenue, is since we won't be necessarily taxing the income on many of these people, if they move to a rural county, they won't be paying income. If they have a job that's not a wage job, they won't be participating in income. So we're just looking at sales tax increase to see that increase. So it's probably not happening. I was going to comment just on some of the tax questions that the House has, I think, put the brakes on a couple of other bills that were sent over that dealt with taxes. One was when we were looking for ways to find money to expand the homestead property tax relief for seniors, for disabled. The Senate said, oh, let's just take that from the earned income tax credit and cut that in half. So I think the brakes were put on that by someone who we consider a conservative. And then the other thing we sent over that I haven't heard about yet was, let's give health clubs exemptions on property tax. So we're confusing the issue in a number of ways on taxes.
A few years ago, when we had a problem with school finance, one response was to selectively allow districts to raise the local option tax, which really is saying, go raise the property tax. Do you think there's any risk of that at this point? And also, I'd be interested, neither of you have commented on any acts that affect labor unions.
With regard to the finance for school education, I think we've passed a bill that extends that ability to use that in the 4 largest districts for 6 years. So we have looked at extending that. And I know that Representative Davis has worked a lot on many of the anti-labor bills.
Just first on the school finance question, many of you know that the way schools are financed is they Lawrence USD 497 receives a certain amount of base aid per pupil per student, and then there are certain weightings that can increase that amount based upon different factors, such as whether a kid is defined as being at risk. And then in addition to that, there is a local option budget that we can decide to exercise on our own and raise our own property taxes in order to put additional dollars into schools. One of the controversial things that the legislature has been is how far do you let school districts go in terms of the local option budget. Johnson County, for example, in Blue Valley, one mill raises you over $3 million. In Oswego, down in the southeast part of the state, one mill raises you just short of $12,000. So it can have a very, very disequalizing effect, and we have tried for many years, and most of the arguments that we have at the legislature are about equity and how are we going to try to fund schools. A number of years ago, we decided to equalize the local option budget, which said, okay, if Johnson County, you want to go raise that, a mill or two, get $3 million, $6 million in Blue Valley, some of that money is going to go out across the state to districts that need a little bit of help. The problem is that the legislature has not, they're supposed to fund a portion of that equalization, and they have not done that. And when the school finance case gets up to the Supreme Court, we're going to get slapped around by the court for exactly that. And there's a whole lot of different equity issues that go into that. The labor unions have been under attack in a very, very big way during this session. They have been trying to take away their ability to participate in the political process by not allowing them to deduct contributions that they make from their paychecks that go into political action funds. We have reduced unemployment benefits for people who are out of work. There are bills that will reduce workers' compensation benefits and completely restructure the workers' compensation structure where it is highly tilted towards people on the business side. And this is really an effort that you're seeing all across the country. It's a little slice of Wisconsin that has come to Kansas, and really what I think it is about is it's political payback. It's unions traditionally support Democrats, and Republicans are in power, and they're gonna it's the old reward your friends and punish your enemies, and that's exactly what's happening. Yeah.
Yes, I want to bring up another topic. How the state is divided into districts for electing members of the Senate and the House of Representatives. My understanding that college students are not counted where they're going to school, but where their parents live. So several thousand KU students are not counted in Douglas County. Can you comment on that?
We are the only state in the country that allows this. And it was put into the state constitution a while back. I don't know why, but it was. And it also has, this applies to folks that are in the military. And frankly, we would probably have another full House district in Douglas County if this wasn't the way that it is. And I don't think it's very fair, because what Marci and I represent people who, we have to represent them, but yet, and they can vote for us, but they are not counted as citizens in our district. Just doesn't really make any sense.
I just wanted to be clear that it's not that the students are counted where their parents live, it's they are counted where they choose to be counted. So there was a Kansas census, and the university did a very good job of making sure before anybody got to move into a residence hall that they filled out that form. For my district, the assumption was, when we were looking at the maps, is that Lawrence has grown, and I would have a slightly smaller district to remain at parity with the other Senate districts. Because of this change in the census, it appears that I lost 7,000 residents in the district, and that's probably much of the reason that my district has expanded to include almost all of Jefferson County. So it is having a significant effect, and probably not doing as good a job as we should see in terms of making sure this district is represented well. And people might argue that the Jefferson County district is represented differently than they would be.
Is there any? Hilda.
What do you think the chances are of the governor being able to stuff the court?
Right, as Marci mentioned, the governor has already signed a bill that changes the way judges are selected for the Kansas Court of Appeals. That's just because the Court of Appeals is not in the state's constitution, so changing how judges are selected there does not require a constitutional amendment. Changing how Supreme Court justices are selected does require a constitutional amendment, which requires a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate. The governor actually has no role in this, and then it goes on the ballot, and the simple majority of the people are required to approve it. Right now, the House has enough votes to block his proposal from going forward, and we're hoping that's going to stay the same way. Yes, sir.
Is there anyone in the Republican Party that can talk sense to Brownback?
Oh.
Really, I'm serious. Somebody's got to challenge him.
I don't know. Probably not.
Some of the individuals in the Republican Party who did bring up issues last year, saw very difficult campaigns and a lot of money working against them from the Republican Party. So it's not clear that that's an easy thing to do from within the legislature. So I know Senator Dick Kelsey was a conservative, but had some specific concerns about group homes and the tax issue, and was willing to bring those forward and was challenged.
John?
I know you have lobbyists in Topeka. My question to both of you is, what is your contact with lobbyists, and how do they influence your thinking or voting or whatever?
Interesting question. There are a lot of lobbyists in Topeka. I think there are, I don't know how many, 500 or so registered lobbyists. Now, not all of them are there every day and are people who are really involved in the process on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I would say that number is probably less than 100. You know, lobbyists in Kansas, you don't see, I think, the stories that you hear about in Washington, D.C. with, you know, Jack Abramoff and people like that. I mean, I really do believe we have a fairly clean political system. I've never had a lobbyist who has, I think, inappropriately tried to pressure me on a vote. They're mainly trying to provide information and advocate for their clients. Now, I will say there are some situations where I think the influence of money really gets into the system and produces some bad results. And Marci referenced one of those earlier. This health club property tax exemption is the poster child for bad tax policy. The legislature is really not in the business of granting property tax exemptions. That happens mainly at the local level. But you got a guy who has spent tens of thousands of dollars in campaign contributions, who's hired lobbyists, and now this bill is sailing through the process as a result of that. That doesn't happen very often, but it's happening with this particular bill.
We certainly see a wide variety of lobbyists approach us on a wide variety of issues, and we do ask the Kansas KNEA, the Teachers Association, for information on how this is affecting issues. I think there's a very young and energetic lobbyist now for the Kansas Farmers Union who was working hard against the corporate ag bill and was able to point out how the stance that the Kansas Farm Bureau lobbyist was taking was against the resolutions that they had adopted for 2013. So it's very good to have some other people researching issues. I was probably disappointed in the, I think, ability that lobbyists and utility companies, telecommunications companies had on our latest telecommunications bill, because the chair of the Senate Utilities Committee actually sent out proposed balloon amendments that had been offered in some testimony from the companies and asked for their comments, you know, with a 24-hour turnaround time, and did not also send those to the to CURB, the Consumers Utility Rate Board. And so we do need to be always vigilant about making sure that we are hearing from all sides on an issue, and that the legislature isn't just contacting or asking for presentations from one side or another.
Last question.
Well, I heard on NPR this morning about Governor Brownback's approval rating, and frighteningly low. Does that have like zip influence on him? Does he care? Does he care?
You know, I don't know I will tell you one thing that would be interesting to watch the Medicaid expansion issue. If the governor decides to accept Medicaid expansion, I think that will be indicative of the fact that he sees the bad poll numbers and is concerned about it. So far, we haven't seen any sign that that's having much of an effect on him. But I think he is struggling right now between wanting to be able to say when he's running for president that I fully opposed Obamacare and I never agreed with anything with it. And he's trying to also at the same time realize that if he says no to Medicaid expansion, those poll numbers may dip even further. But
well, I would add to Medicaid, we should watch what happens with regards to individuals with developmental disabilities. That's another very challenging argument that those should not be brought into CanCare. And that's been another issue that we've seen a lot about. Well, there's more to talk about. We could give you more bad news about historic preservation and environs, drug testing, women's reproductive rights, but we'll save that for a later date.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to first introduce yourself and say hello?
Brenner. I don't know.
Well, I just saw you as a new person here.
Oh, yes, I've come a few times. I like to sit with Vicki.
That's right.
But I've been a few times. I'm a retired pharmacist and kind of getting into things here in Florence.
We're going to start surprising people like this. So, thank you all very much. See you next week. We'll see about the future of the Haskell wetlands. Oh, brother.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.